There's a strange feeling hanging over WWE in 2025, and it's not the kind you can point to with one headline or one bad decision. It's quieter than that, more subtle. Almost like the calm you feel right before a storm breaks. On the surface, everything looks functional. The shows are running, the stories are moving, the machine is doing what it's always done. But if you've been watching closely, if you've been paying attention the way longtime fans do, something doesn't feel right. It's the accumulation of small moments that don't quite add up. Decisions that feel rushed, then reversed. Storylines that start with confidence and end without explanation. Wrestlers who are positioned one week and quietly cooled off the next. None of these things alone would cause alarm. WWE has always been chaotic. But when they begin to stack on top of each other, when too many strange things happen at once, coincidence stops being a satisfying explanation. This isn't about jumping to conclusions or treating rumors like facts. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about recognizing patterns because WWE history has taught fans a hard lesson over the years. The biggest shifts in this company rarely arrive with warning sirens. They start as whispered, as uneasy conversations online, as fans saying, "Am I the only one noticing this?" Before long, those whispers turn into reality and everyone pretends the signs weren't there all along. That's why 2025 feels different. There's a tension beneath the weekly programming, a sense that the company is moving faster than its own stories can keep up with. You can feel it in the crowd reactions, in the way fans respond on social media, in the growing gap between what WWE says it's building and what actually unfolds on screen. This video isn't about panic or outrage. It's about listening to that instinct fans develop after years of watching this industry closely. Because when wrestling fans start feeling uneasy for the same reasons at the same time, history suggests something is coming. And when it does, it rarely arrives quietly. Change is brewing. When rumors begin circulating about a locker room, the most telling detail is often not what is said, but what isn't. In 2025, WWE's backstage atmosphere has become a topic fans can't stop circling, largely because official voices aren't addressing it at all. There are quiet reports of morale issues, performers feeling creatively boxed in, and talent growing frustrated with start-stop pushes that never fully materialize. None of this has been confirmed, and that's precisely why it feels familiar. WWE's silence has always been a language of its own. Historically, the company denies rumors loudly when they are false. When it chooses restraint instead, fans tend to pay closer attention. We've seen this pattern before. There was a time when everything was fine behind the scenes until it suddenly wasn't, and contracts expired, releases happened, or major exits shocked everyone at once. The warning signs were there, buried in unexplained absences and carefully worded non-answers. Lately, those absences are harder to ignore. Wrestlers vanish from television without storyline explanation. Others return with noticeably altered roles, as if plans changed midstream. Contract situations are whispered about but never clarified, creating the sense that negotiations are happening quietly, away from public reassurance. For fans, that uncertainty breeds suspicion, not because they want drama, but because wrestling history has trained them to read between the lines. Trust becomes fragile in moments like this. WWE asks fans to invest emotionally, to believe in long-term storytelling, yet avoids addressing why certain stories abruptly stall. That disconnect creates space for rumors to grow. When information is partial, people fill in the blanks themselves, and once fans start connecting dots, even innocently, it's hard to stop. What makes 2025 unsettling is how many of these signals are appearing at the same time. One or two rumors would be noise, a pattern is something else entirely. Morale questions, creative frustration, quiet contract tension, and unexplained creative shifts don't automatically mean disaster. But they do suggest instability. And WWE's past shows that backstage unrest rarely stays backstage forever. Eventually, it spills onto the screen where everyone can see it. And that is why fans keep listening to the quiet spaces between announcements. They remember how often reassurances arrived right before major shakeups, how phrases like "plans changed" became explanations after the damage was done. Silence doesn't prove guilt, but in wrestling, it has learned meaning through repetition. The longer WWE avoids clarity, the more room these whispers have to grow roots. In a business built on trust and illusion, uncertainty is combustible, and right now, too many unanswered questions are sitting too close to the flame. History suggests storms rarely announce themselves before they arrive. In this industry alone, one of the clearest reasons fans feel uneasy in 2025 is not because WWE booking is bad, but because it feels internally conflicted. Stories begin with clear direction, strong presentation, and confident messaging, only to pivot abruptly without explanation. Wrestlers are framed as important, even inevitable, and then quietly repositioned as if the build never happened. This creates cognitive dissonance, because fans are being asked to emotionally invest in outcomes that the company itself seems unwilling to commit to. What makes this frustration different from past years is that it's logical, not reactionary. Fans aren't upset because their favorite didn't win a match. They're confused because the rules of storytelling keep changing. WWE often speaks about long-term planning, layered narratives, and patience, yet the on-screen product repeatedly contradicts that philosophy. Pushes stall, momentum disappears. Feuds end without resolution. When actions don't match words, trust erodes slowly but consistently. There are moments where WWE appears to actively undermine its own stories. A wrestler will overcome adversity only to lose credibility weeks later for no clear reason. A rivalry will be framed as deeply personal, then resolved with a rushed finish that leaves more questions than answers. These aren't isolated incidents. They form a pattern that suggests indecision behind the curtain rather than deliberate creative risk. Fans notice because wrestling, at its best, rewards attention to detail. This creates a subtle but powerful instinct in viewers that something is wrong. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just off. Wrestling audiences are conditioned to suspend disbelief, but that suspension relies on internal logic. When storytelling breaks its own rules too often, disbelief doesn't suspend anymore. It pushes back. Fans start analyzing instead of feeling, questioning instead of reacting, and that's a dangerous shift for a product built on emotional investment. Importantly, this isn't about one booker or one decision. It feels systemic, like multiple ideas competing at once, none allowed to fully breathe. WWE still produces great moments, but they're increasingly isolated instead of connected. The glue that once held stories together feels thinner, stretched across too many directions at once. That tension shows up in pacing, in character consistency, and in payoffs that feel smaller than the build-up promised. When fans express concern, it's often dismissed as impatience or entitlement, but history shows that sustained confusion is rarely harmless. WWE has gone through phases like this before, where inconsistent booking was later revealed to be a symptom of deeper creative or structural shifts. Fans aren't panicking, they're observing. And when enough people independently reach the same conclusion, the discomfort stops being emotional and starts becoming analytical. Something doesn't add up, and the longer it continues, the harder it is to ignore. In every uncertain period in WWE, attention eventually shifts from systems to people. In 2025, fans aren't just questioning decisions, they're watching specific names more closely than ever. Certain superstars feel like warning signals, not because anything has been confirmed, but because their trajectories no longer make sense. Sudden pushes arrive without foundation. Momentum disappears without payoff. Characters change tone or direction so quickly that it feels less like evolution and more like interruption. Fans form deep identity attachments to wrestlers. They don't just watch them perform, they track their journeys, setbacks, and growth over years. So when a performer who seemed positioned for something meaningful is quietly moved aside, it creates anxiety. Not outrage, but concern. The question becomes simple and unsettling. What changed? When there's no answer, speculation fills the gap. That speculation isn't born from entitlement, it's born from emotional investment. Some names spark conversation because they're suddenly everywhere, pushed hard without the narrative groundwork that usually supports it. Others spark conversation because they're suddenly nowhere, removed from television with no storyline explanation. Both situations feel unnatural to longtime viewers. WWE has always been deliberate about who it features and why. When that clarity disappears, fans instinctively assume something is happening behind the scenes. Then there are the stranger cases where a wrestler remains present but feels altered. A character that once connected emotionally now feels muted. A performer known for intensity suddenly feels restrained. These shifts may be creative experiments or they may be compromises. The problem is fans can't tell which, and that uncertainty breeds fear of loss. Wrestling history is full of stories where cooled momentum led to exits, reinventions, or careers that never fully recovered. Importantly, no single name proves anything. That's not the point. What matters is that fans across different communities are whispering about the same people for similar reasons. When speculation becomes collective rather than isolated, it signals a shared discomfort. People aren't trying to expose secrets. They're trying to understand why wrestlers they care about feel increasingly disconnected from the stories being told. This is where relatability becomes powerful. Fans see themselves in these performers. They project loyalty, patience, and belief onto them. When WWE appears to move on abruptly, fans feel ignored by extension. It's not just about screen time, it's about acknowledgement. And when enough wrestlers fall into this uncertain space at once, the consequences extend beyond individual careers. They begin to affect how fans trust the company's direction as a whole. Uncertainty doesn't stay contained, it spreads quietly name by name. And once that spread reaches a critical point, every new booking choice is filtered through suspicion rather than excitement, changing how audiences process WWE altogether. Whenever uncertainty builds in WWE, attention eventually turns upward. In 2025, that focus has landed squarely on management and creative leadership, not out of hostility but out of confusion. Fans are trying to understand who truly holds the wheel and whether that hand is steady. Triple H represents a new era of authority for many viewers, one that initially inspired optimism, patience, and trust. That's why the questions forming now feel heavier than simple criticism. Rumors of internal power struggles and decision bottlenecks have begun circulating, not loudly, but persistently. Stories of ideas being approved, stalled, then reshaped at the last moment create the impression of creative traffic jams. From the outside, it can feel like too many voices are influencing outcomes, or worse, that decisive direction is being softened to accommodate competing priorities. Fans don't claim to know the full structure, but they recognize when momentum repeatedly dies at the same point in the process. This is where authority becomes complicated. Triple H is viewed not just as an executive, but as someone who understands wrestling from the inside. That reputation raises expectations. When decisions land poorly, fans don't just disagree, they feel personally let down. The emotional backlash doesn't come from hatred, it comes from belief. People expected alignment between leadership philosophy and on-screen results. When that alignment fractures, disappointment feels sharper than it would under faceless corporate control. At the same time, there is an effort among fans to remain fair. Many acknowledge that leadership decisions must balance business realities, network demands, and long-term strategy. The frustration arises when those justifications are invisible while the consequences are not. When management logic is silent but emotional fallout is loud, the gap widens. Fans begin to frame the situation as us versus them, not because they want conflict, but because communication feels one-sided. Accountability bias plays a major role here. When things go right, leadership is praised. When things go wrong, leadership becomes the focal point by default. That's not entirely reasonable, but it is predictable. WWE itself has trained audiences to view creative direction as intentional and centralized. When outcomes feel messy, fans assume the mess has an owner. Triple H becomes the symbol, fairly or unfairly, of every unresolved story and every confusing pivot. What keeps this conversation from boiling over completely is controlled controversy. WWE has just enough success to prevent full rebellion, but enough misfires to sustain debate. That middle ground is dangerous. It encourages constant questioning without resolution. Fans argue among themselves about whether leadership is building something long-term or losing touch with the audience it serves. The result is a growing sense that management may be thinking several steps ahead while fans are stuck dealing with the fallout of the present. That disconnect doesn't mean leadership is wrong, but it does mean trust is being tested. And in wrestling, once trust becomes a debate instead of a given, every decision is judged more harshly. Power doesn't disappear in moments like this, it gets questioned. And once that questioning becomes routine, authority feels less stable, no matter how logical the intentions behind it may be. The real danger WWE faces in 2025 isn't backlash, criticism, or angry headline. It's something far quieter and far more damaging: fans slowly checking out. Wrestling history shows that outrage burns hot but fades fast. Disengagement, on the other hand, lingers. It doesn't announce itself with chants or hashtags. It shows up as silence, skipped segments, and viewers who stop caring enough to complain. Rumors feed this fatigue in subtle ways. When uncertainty piles up without resolution, emotional investment becomes work. Fans who once defended long-term storytelling begin to hesitate. Trust turns into cautious optimism, then into emotional distance. That shift is dangerous because WWE relies on emotional ownership. The audience doesn't just consume wrestling, they feel responsible for it. When that bond weakens, momentum becomes difficult to rebuild. We've seen this before. There were periods in WWE history where crowds didn't revolt immediately. They just grew quieter, reactions softened, engagement dipped. By the time ratings reflected the problem, the damage had already been done. Fans hadn't turned away in anger, they drifted away in boredom and distrust. That collective memory still lingers, especially among longtime viewers who recognize the early warning signs. In 2025, many fans feel tired rather than furious, tired of waiting for payoffs that never arrive, tired of defending decisions that don't age well, tired of being told to be patient while stories reset repeatedly. This emotional exhaustion is where apathy grows, and apathy is the one reaction WWE cannot book around. You can redirect anger, you can harness controversy. You can't force people to care once they've stopped. Loss aversion plays a role here too. Fans sense that something valuable could be slipping away, not all at once but piece by piece. The fear isn't that WWE will fail overnight. It's that the connection that made it special will quietly erode. That fear makes 2025 feel like a tipping point, not a collapse but a crossroads. If WWE listens, adjusts, and reestablishes trust, this period becomes a growing pain. If it doesn't, disengagement spreads slowly and visibly until rebuilding costs far more than addressing concerns ever would have. Wrestling survives on emotion. When fans stop feeling, the danger has already arrived. If even half of these rumors prove true, the outcome doesn't have to be catastrophic to be meaningful. WWE wouldn't suddenly collapse, nor would the industry unravel overnight. The more realistic scenario is quieter, small shifts with long shadows, creative trust thinning. Fans becoming selective about what they emotionally invest in, choosing moments over journeys. The product would still exist, but it would feel different, less cohesive, less certain of itself. One possible outcome is normalization of instability. Fans adapt to inconsistency by lowering expectations. They stop assuming stories will pay off and start treating each segment as disposable. That may protect viewers from disappointment, but it also strips wrestling of its power. When nothing feels permanent, nothing feels important. Characters stop feeling like evolving people and start feeling like interchangeable pieces. Another scenario is talent recalibration. Wrestlers caught in the middle of shifting priorities may reinvent themselves elsewhere or never fully recover lost momentum, not through scandal or dramatic exits but through quiet erosion. Opportunities missed rarely make headlines, yet they define eras just as strongly as championships do. Over time, that erosion reshapes the roster and the audience's emotional attachment to it. There is also the possibility that WWE absorbs the noise and moves forward unchanged. That outcome isn't comforting either. When leadership grows accustomed to fan concern without consequence, distance grows. Fans don't want control, but they do want acknowledgement. When they feel unheard, loyalty becomes conditional. Support turns transactional rather than emotional. None of this is inevitable. Wrestling history shows that awareness can lead to correction. Periods of uncertainty have been followed by creative renaissances before. That's why this conversation matters, not to accuse but to reflect. Fans discuss rumors not because they enjoy instability, but because they care deeply about what WWE represents in their lives. So the question isn't whether these rumors are true, it's what happens if they're ignored. Does WWE course correct and restore trust, or does it accept quiet disengagement as the cost of doing business? That answer won't come from announcements or press releases. It will come from choices, consistency, and time. And the fans, as always, will be watching not with anger but with hope tempered by experience. They understand that wrestling survives on belief, and once belief fractures, rebuilding it demands humility, clarity, patience, and respect for the audience that carried the product through every uncertain era together always.